Reported in the first known Chinese handbook for emergency medicine, a doctor described administering fermented human fecal suspension by mouth for the treatment of severe diarrhea and food poisoning.
It's lit!
With aesthetic considerations in mind, doctors didn't want to label their treatments as fecal suspension, so they got creative and they used other names like yellow soup. What's almost even more surprising is that in modern times, fecal matter transplantation is not only being used, but also studied for a multitude of different conditions, ranging from autoimmune disorders such as allergies, to cancer, to even things like mental disorders like depression and schizophrenia, as well as the topic of this video, which is obesity and weight loss. Now, there's no question obesity is a worldwide epidemic. About 30% of the adult population was estimated to be obese in 2014, and at the rate that it was estimated at the time, by 2030, 50% of the world's adult population would be obese. It turns out that germs and microorganisms are not only abundant in our own bodies, but they're also vitally important to our standard physiology and health. In our guts exists the gut microbiome. The microbiome is the totality of microorganisms, from bacteria to fungi to protozoa, and if you count it as life, viruses. We're going to just focus on bacteria from here on out. Our guts provide an environment for bacteria to thrive. In fact, it's actually estimated that if we were just to take cell count, so the total number of cells in our body, it will match 1-to-1 to the amount of bacteria that we host. What is not equal is the amount of genes that these bacteria hold compared to our own DNA. Compared to our own DNA, the gut microbiome holds 150 times more genes. And put simply, these genes are like tools, encoding for certain cellular abilities and functions. It's actually quite genius. By housing these bacteria, we've effectively gained a larger array of metabolic capabilities at a much faster rate than otherwise possible. What is really important is the types of bacteria that are existing in our guts. We don't always get the best bacteria. Life is not fair, and it turns out that between individuals, there's quite a difference between gut microbiomes. Much like people have varying genetic traits, our gut microbiome can also differ from individual to individual. And this is where the Chinese Handbook of Emergency Medicine starts to sound less and less crazy. A fascinating example was a twin study, where stool samples were taken from two twins, except one of these twins was obese, whereas the other twin was lean. Stool samples were taken because they contain a representative population of the gut microbiome from each of the twins. These stool samples, along with its bacteria, were then transplanted into two separate groups of mice. Now, although these mice had the same diet and the same energy expenditure, one group consistently would gain more weight. The mice that received the stool sample from the obese twin were now more efficient at absorbing nutrients from their diet, and therefore gained more weight. The researchers further compared and studied the gut microbiomes of lean humans and obese humans, and what they consistently found was a difference in two types of bacteria: firmicutes and bacteroidetes.
Bacteroids.
Bacteroids.
Bacteroides.
Bacteroides.
Bacteroids.
That's like 3 different pronunciations. Bacteroids. We're going with bacteroids. The ratio between two types of bacteria, firmicutes and bacteroids. Obese people always had more firmicutes and lower bacteroids, whereas lean people had the opposite ratio, with more bacteroids and less firmicutes. Now, it's always good to remember correlation does not mean causality. Whether these patterns emerge because of obesity or whether they cause obesity is another question up for debate. Now, when we talk about modifying our biology and physiology, things like gene editing are usually what comes to mind. The gut microbiome in general is just as exciting in terms of modifying our biology and physiology. But by all means, please do not eat poop. It's absolutely grotesque and disgusting, and I am not recommending you to eat poop. Modern day, we have much better methods of fecal matter transplantation. You don't need to eat poop. Just don't do it. If you're interested in the gut microbiome, there is an overwhelming amount of information out there. I've barely scratched the surface, but what I'll do is I'll leave a review in the description below if you're interested. Otherwise, please stay curious, and I hope you enjoyed this first video.